Welcome everybody to our April caregiver webinar. Thank you to everybody who's joining in. I'm going to give folks just about 60 seconds to hop on. We will give a brief introduction to our presenter. So we'll get started shortly. I'm also going to put a link in the chat for where you can find resources from previous sessions and also our schedule for our upcoming webinar. We will be announcing the dates and the schedule for next year's, which will start in August as well. So we're really excited to have some of our speakers back and possibly some new speakers as well. So please feel free to share with friends, colleagues, other caregivers in the community who may be interested in attending some of these sessions. So I will jump in and give a brief introduction for our speaker, my colleague who is here today, and then we will have Dr. Andrew take it away. So again, welcome everybody and thank you for joining. Lilia Mucka Andrew, PhD, is a licensed clinical psychologist in the Division of Psychology and Behavioral Health at Children's National. Dr. Andrew specializes in the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, tic disorders, PANDAS, depression, and anxiety disorders in children and adolescents. She uses cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, exposure response prevention, ERP, dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, and the comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics. She takes a patient-centered approach to help youth and their families to build skills and reach their therapeutic goals. And Dr. Andrews' research interests include parent and child motivation, barriers to treatment, and goal engagement in treatment for anxiety disorders. So I am so pleased to welcome my colleague, Dr. Andrew, to our caregiver webinar today.
All right, I'm very excited to be here today. The title of this presentation is Anxiety in Your Child. I think this is a really important topic just because, we all have stress, we all have emotions that we have to face. And I think different levels of anxiety are probably one of the most common, not just for your children, but for even yourselves as parents. And so I really wanted to take the time to talk through today a little bit about anxiety and what it means, what it looks like, some of the signs that you can watch for as a parent, and then some of the different strategies that you can be using at home to help support your child, but also thinking a little bit about when might it make sense to get your child additional support from somewhere else. So I'll go ahead and jump in. No conflicts or anything like that. So the agenda will start with talking about what anxiety is and what some of the different signs of anxiety are. Then we'll move a little bit more into what you can actually do to help support your child. So thinking about management strategies and something called facing fears or bravery missions or exposure. So talking a little bit about what does that actually mean? What does that look like? And then wanting to leave a little bit of time at the end for just general questions or things that pop up as you're thinking about anxiety and how this looks in life for you. So I think the point that I will make several times throughout this talk is that anxiety is a really normal response to stressful things that happen in life. So different experiences, different situations that pop up in the environment for you as a parent, for your child, it makes sense to have anxiety as a response. And I think going through the pandemic in these last couple of years, it really makes sense that your child would have an anxiety response because that is something that's very stressful. And so the response itself is helpful, it's adaptive, it's existed for a very long time because our brains and our bodies work together to try and keep us safe and signal when there's danger. So having some level of anxiety and some of this stress response is very normal, is very important. So our mission and learning strategies or watching out for things is to, first of all, just start with the idea that being anxious itself is not something that has to be bad. And our goal is not to eliminate it, because that would be in some ways even more problematic than having anxiety. So our mission is really to help kids balance out their anxiety and learn to coexist with it. So the next few slides, I want to talk a little bit about some of the signs to look for when it comes to anxiety and ways you can identify it in kids, both through some of the reports that they make about their physical bodies and some of the thoughts or behaviors that you might see them engaging in. So for the physical side of things, anxiety activates this fight or flight response, which is very difficult on our bodies. It can lead to a lot of aches or pains, headaches or stomach aches are commonly reported in kids. You can have changes in breathing, so maybe feeling some shortness of breath or hyperventilating, really fast heart rate, getting a little sweaty or shaky, or sometimes kids will even become tearful and just kind of complain that they're not feeling well. And sometimes you can see your child starting to become really stressed out and experiencing this shift and this change, tightening in muscles. So these are some of the things that you can be looking out for and helping to teach your child to look out for and be aware of their body and how sometimes stress can trigger these reactions and responses. In the area of thoughts or actions that you might see from your child, a lot of times they're experiencing unwanted worry thoughts. So kind of like intruders coming in, worrying about if things are going to be okay, or what's going to happen, or how the future looks, or if they did something well enough. So you might start to experience some of this actually reflected in the conversations that they have with you. So they may express some of these worry thoughts out loud, or they might just isolate a little bit more and seem to be lost in thought, having these thoughts more privately on their own. You might also see a change in behavior with reassurance seeking. And I'll talk more about reassurance. But with anxiety wants certainty, it wants the answers to things. And so if kids are feeling more anxious, they will look for that reassurance that everything is okay and everything is fine. And that often will be, asking their guardian questions, or maybe asking questions of their friends or at school. So if you see more of this questioning, that could be a sign that anxious thoughts are increasing, anxiety is getting higher. And then a lot of times, if you start to see your child avoiding things, so that could be just this general, I'm fine, when you can very clearly see that they actually seem to be struggling or having a hard time, or not wanting to do things or go places. So, for example, if they're starting to feel really uncomfortable in social situations or with social interactions, they might not even want to go to their favorite restaurant because they worry that there will be too many people, or they might see somebody that they know. This is a slide that covers just some different types of anxious thoughts that could pop into a child's mind. They could be related to perfection or needing to do things exactly right. Could be related to school or academics, worrying about grades, or maybe even having kind of like a domino effect with the worry thought. So, oh no, if I don't get a good score on this math test, what is that going to mean for my math grade for this quarter? And if I don't do well this quarter, how will I do for the whole semester? And what does this mean then for my chances of getting into a good college? So you could see that anxious thoughts can really spiral and get pretty big pretty quickly. I think another thought that that kids and teens will often have when they start to feel anxious, they start to feel bad, is that feeling bad or feeling any kind of discomfort is actually bad or wrong. And the only feeling that's okay is feeling comfortable. So kids will, do what they can to distract or avoid so they don't have to feel nervous or feel bored or feel this bad feeling. So we'll talk a little bit more in the strategies of how you can help support your kids in kind of learning that there are no good or bad emotions. There's just emotions and they happen for a reason and they're all really important and meaningful. This feels dangerous. That means I should believe that it is. I think that's a big thing that anxiety pushes us to think is that, oh, I'm anxious, so this thing must be, something that I need to avoid. And if we start to actually believe that and act on it, then our world becomes very small. So if kids are really worried about turning on their Zoom screens for school, and they think, I feel really anxious, I feel really bad, this means I can't do it, I can't handle it, they're more likely to turn the screens off and keep turning them off. And then I think the big thing is the idea that when kids are stressed or they're anxious, they worry that I can't handle this feeling or I can't handle doing this thing that seems really intimidating or seems really hard. And the more that kids tell themselves that they can't, they start to believe they can't, and they really will decrease the times that they try something new or something out of their comfort zone. So you may have noticed, especially with COVID, a lot of times when kids are anxious or feeling stressed, they might come to you as the parent or the guardian to, look to understand their emotions or to find some comfort. And so two of the things that might happen with anxiety is that kids will start to seek reassurance, or sometimes kids will ask or require accommodations. So the big thing with reassurance is that you definitely do want to provide reassurance to your child in reassuring that they can handle their emotions, reassuring that emotions will come and go, that they're not alone, that you're there to support them. And one of the things that we'll talk more about is just being careful not to reassure safety or provide guarantees that you can't make. I think that that's really important when we even think about, COVID or saying like, oh, reassuring you're going to be fine or you're not going to get COVID. Well, we can't reassure those things. And you don't have to as a parent because you can't predict the future any more than they can. And so one of the things that's really helpful is just saying, I know it's really scary, not knowing what might happen. I understand that feeling must be really hard. And, I can feel scared sometimes too. We're going to be able to do this together. So providing that reassurance, that comfort that you're there, that you believe in them, but not necessarily guaranteeing things that we can't guarantee. And then the other big piece is accommodations. I put these eggshells on the screen because oftentimes what you'll start to notice when there's a shift from maybe general stress to higher levels of anxiety is that kids will have more rules or expectations that anxiety is putting out there for them and for you as parents in terms of what you can or can't do. So for example, if kids start to get really anxious about social interactions, they might start to say, oh, I'm not going to order my food at the restaurant. I need you to order my food for me. So that's an example of an accommodation they're asking for. They're asking you to do this because it will help them feel less stressed or help them feel better. And you might also notice that sometimes as a parent, your kids don't even ask for something, but you just start to act differently because you worry, oh, if I turn on the light too early, it's going to, make my kid really upset and really anxious. So, I'm just going to wait to get ready in the morning, or I'm just going to get ready in the dark because I don't want to upset them. And so these are kind of, if you start to notice these patterns of, wow, I'm having to do these things, or I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, or my child is asking a lot more questions, seeking a lot of reassurance that maybe they didn't before. These could be some signs and indicators that your child is struggling with higher levels of anxiety. So a lot of things on this graphic, but just sums up some of the different ways that anxiety can present itself. So sometimes it can be in, difficulty with sleep or paying attention. Sometimes it might be changes in the way that your child reacts. So if they typically have like an even way of reacting to situations that pop up, but suddenly they're getting really angry, or maybe a very small thing, or what seems like a small thing, creates a very drastic, big reaction. Getting into this chandeliering example, where it's surprising that it seems like it would be a small event that occurred, but it really causes a big reaction. A lot of times we kind of mentioned before the avoidance. And so kids will start to withdraw or avoid doing things. They might also just experience more negativity or focus on the negative things, or have more negative thoughts than other kids who aren't experiencing anxiety. And then a lot of times, because anxiety really likes to have control and have a plan, sometimes kids will respond to that by over planning and really trying to have everything in their control and having a perfect idea of what's on the agenda. And then anytime a change happens or something unexpected pops up, then that can really trigger kids to feel very upset or very frustrated. And I think defiance is an important piece too. That's number 3. A lot of times kids who are anxious, especially younger kids, might have a hard time explaining what's happening or what they're starting to feel. So they might not listen to instructions, or not be doing things because they're worried or they're scared, but it can look like they're just not following instructions or disobeying the teacher or their guardians. So that might be something to look out for and be mindful of. So at the beginning, I said, again, anxiety is on a kind of a continuum, a line. We all have some level of stress, some level of anxiety. And so I think the big question that oftentimes parents are wondering, when is this normal anxiety, an experience of, day-to-day life and the challenges that come with it, versus when is this now maybe starting to cause a problem or getting in the way for my child. And I think these are some of the big categories that you can really be on the lookout for in terms of seeing that anxiety has shifted from sometimes popping up in the day to getting in the way of your child being able to do things. So school is a huge one. If you see shifts in grades or ability to do homework or studying, or just school refusal, suddenly not wanting to go to school. Social interactions or changes with friendships, any kind of notable mood shifts or mood changes, or just a change in functioning for like day-to-day activities. So not sleeping or shifts in appetite, not being able to do things as independently as they were before. These are all some of the signs that anxiety might be shifting from something that you might expect for their age to something that seems like it's higher than you would expect. So again, just really highlighting that, anxiety and the things that kids worry about or feel nervous about, it shifts as kids develop and get older. Really, like every single child has worries and fears, and these over time can vary. So younger kids might worry more about separating from their parents or worrying about ghosts or robbers. Teenagers may worry more about social interactions and experiencing judgment or negative evaluation. So these kinds of shifts across the lifespan are to be expected. It's really important not to view them as a problem or something that needs to be stopped or eliminated. Having some worry thoughts or having some worries is a very normal part of your child's experience. It'll be a very normal part of their adult experience as well. And so the mission is not to get rid of those worries, but instead help teach your child to have a different relationship with worry and with fear. It's not something that has to stop them or has to be a really terrible experience, but something that they can learn from. It's something they can face. It's something that they can do not alone, but with the support of their loved ones. So that was a summary of some of the different signs, the things to look out for. Again, it's really a mind-body connection with anxiety. So you can see a lot of anxiety present itself in worry thoughts. You can see anxiety oftentimes in avoidance or pulling away. And a lot of times anxiety is very physical because you do have this fight or flight system that gets activated. So the faster heart rate, the sweating, crying, these are all the things that we can be on the lookout for as possible signs. But it's also really helpful because then we know, okay, these are the things that make me feel more anxious, make my child feel more anxious. So what are the strategies I can now use in response to some of these different categories? So we're not going to have time today to go over every single strategy that's on the list, but I did want to highlight that these are possible ones that you can be working on together with your child at home. There's a lot of great resources out there, just, between apps and YouTube and different kind of books and reading so that you can really do some of this independently, or even if kids are older, they can have some of these apps or resources on their phone as well. We'll go into detail a little bit on the first three in the slides to come. And then talk a little bit more about facing fears as well. But generally, the big goal is that we want to help kids, balance out and manage their emotions and be able to notice and talk about the thoughts and the things that they're thinking. You can do this kind of practice with kids that are very young, by 3-4 years old. Kids are really great at being able to communicate what their feelings are or some of the things that are popping into their head. As they get older, they get a little bit better at being more flexible and thinking about things in slightly different ways. But even early on, you can kind of help with challenging really negative thoughts or helping kids learn some brave scripts or some brave sentences that they can say to themselves if they're feeling really nervous or scared. And then I also added on here, balancing social media intake can be really helpful. I think social media has tremendous strengths and weaknesses. So I think it can be helpful just to, be aware of the social media that kids are using and having some time for that, but then also some very focused time for other types of pleasant events or activities that they can be using, just so they don't feel that social media is their only tool or strategy that they can turn to if they're feeling frustrated or upset. Great. So the first strategy I have on here is the belly breathing. You can see this is a nice visual from Alberta Health that summarizes some of the deep belly breathing steps if you're going to go through. There are so many ways to practice this. There are apps, there's YouTube videos. I think if you have like the watches nowadays, a lot of them have a breathing exercise that you can do built right into the watch. So the big idea here with deep breathing is that because anxiety has such a strong physical piece in it, by sending the signal to your brain and your body that we're breathing, we're bringing in our oxygen, we're calming down our nervous system, it can kind of help turn things around so that we can get closer to feeling calm. I think one of the things that really helps to clarify with kids is that you're not going to take 3 deep breaths and then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm suddenly really chill, cool. No, it's not going to work quite like that. Sometimes I think kids might expect it to be like that. It's more just taking the time to slow down and to start the process to calm your body down. But that can then take, 10, 15 more minutes until you can feel calm again. And usually it's really powerful to combine some breathing with also being mindful of your thoughts. But this is a great strategy. It can feel really nice. It's a good way to slow down your heart rate, to kind of help get your breathing more balanced again. So whether your child's having some shortness of breath or hyperventilating, this can provide that balance between. And again, coaching and kind of guiding them as the parent to let them know that this will help tell your body it's time to start calming down. It's not going to happen right away. Your body needs time to calm down. Progressive muscle relaxation is another one that's really helpful. It's great for that physical piece of anxiety. Muscle tightness and squeezing is really common when kids are feeling anxious and stressed. So you might even physically notice maybe they've got their hands clenched or their whole body looks very tense, or they look like they're on edge. That might be a good sign that they would benefit from really being mindful and aware of that tightness and then being able to squeeze it even harder and then do the exact opposite, which would be totally relaxing. So there are ways that you could do this with your hands, pretending that you're squeezing a lemon and then letting it go. You could actually do it with a stress ball or having an item that you can squeeze and relax. You could do it with shoulders, which is, I think, another common area where a lot of times stress and tightness might be carried. And these videos are available on YouTube. So you can have ones that are very short, 5 minutes or so, but you can also then like squeeze and relax your muscles over the course of 30 plus minutes. There's a whole range of how many muscles and different groups that you can do. And then I said the word mindful already a couple of times, but I did want to have a slide just talking about mindfulness and just a little bit about what it is and what it isn't. So I think by now a lot of kids have heard about mindfulness. A lot of schools might have a mindful minute built in. It's referenced a lot in our social world, our shows and movies and things like that. And so mindfulness isn't necessarily just about, taking some deep breaths or, meditating for a moment. I think it's more than that, and it's hard for kids to understand exactly what mindfulness is meant to do. So it's really about slowing down. We are big in multitasking and doing lots of things at once. And so it's giving kids a chance to just do one thing at a time and to really focus on doing that thing, and to do it without any kind of judgment or any kind of added opinions or interpretation, but just focus on doing one thing at a time. So you can even see in this picture, if you're blowing bubbles, then you're focusing on blowing bubbles. You're not thinking about your math test. You're, not thinking about, that thing that happened last week with your friends. You're focused on the bubble and the container that you're holding and how the bubbles smell and what the wand looks like and how the bubble pops out and watching it float away. So mindfulness is very present, very aware in this moment. And that can be really helpful and powerful for anxiety because there's a lot that can happen with your physical body and with your thoughts when you're anxious. And so if kids are able to sit with those feelings or sit with those thoughts without judgment or without trying to get rid of them, it'll make the experience of having emotions in their life a lot easier. So I think that's where the power of mindfulness comes in, is just being able to sit in the moment with whatever experience kids or teens are having. There's a lot of mindfulness resources out there. a lot of apps and things like that. I have some of these on a slide at the end. Okay, and then the area that I think is really helpful when it comes to anxiety in particular is being able to face fears. So you're maybe thinking like, what does that mean, facing your fears? Some other ways of saying this might be bravery missions or exposures. But essentially with anxiety, it wants all of the answers. It wants certainty. It wants to know exactly what's going to happen, or kind of the sense of control. And anxiety oftentimes will push us to avoid uncomfortable things. And in a lot of ways, this kind of makes sense, right? If you're in the olden days and you look out and you're pretty sure that you see a lion out in the field, anxiety is going to push you to either, one, get away from the lion or be ready to attack. Now, anxiety works really fast. It might not have enough time to process, oh, that's not a lion at all. That's actually like a tree over there, or like a small bush. But because anxiety is trying to act quickly and keep us safe, it's going to assume this negative or the worst case scenario. Now, that makes it really hard in our modern day. If we see something as a threat, it's activating this, fight or flight system, this adrenaline, making us ready to fight a lion or run for our lives, except for instead, kids are sitting in their math class, or, they're at home and there is no place to run or to get this energy out. And so that creates that really uncomfortable feeling inside of the body. And so when it comes to trying to avoid things that make us nervous, it can seem harmless at the start, oh, I don't want to try that new food. I'll just say no, thank you. Or I'm like not super comfortable with, going to the mall. So I'll just order things online. It's, free shipping, pretty easy. And in the short term, that strategy can work really well. You don't feel as nervous. You're still getting things done. It's not super getting in the way. But long term, it can actually cause more harm because it stops kids from learning that they can face their fears, or learning that it's okay to feel anxious or that they can handle feeling anxious. And so a big goal in any kind of anxiety level, whether it's a smaller level of anxiety, or whether it's something like social anxiety, or even something like obsessive compulsive disorder, at the end of the day, the goal is not to get rid of anxiety, but just to help teach your child that they can tolerate it, that they can be anxious, and that they can be successful in facing their fears. So one of the things that you can do as a parent is help create some planned practices to teach your child that they can handle feeling uncomfortable and facing their fears. A lot of times it helps to also build in rewards if you're going to do some kind of a practice. But this could be really helpful if your child's starting to have a lot of social worries and they're pulling away and not putting themselves out there as much. So you might agree together on, okay, you know what, let's do some practices of kind of facing our fears with social situations. Create a list of examples you could work on, such as ordering their own food at a restaurant, and then having a small reward or incentive for when they kind of are able to practice this planned exposure. Another big worry that oftentimes happens with anxiety is needing to know plans. So you could say, okay, today we're going to go on a drive and we're going to go to a surprise location, and you're going to find out what that location is when we arrive at the destination. So with all of these missions, you really want to do them collaboratively with your child or your teen. You don't want it to be some kind of a surprise that they're not participating in, because the goal is really for them to be a part of it so that they're kind of changing the way that they see the world and the way they respond to things. So you can see this is an example of an exposure list if somebody was really nervous about, max fear going to the bathroom in public. So you wouldn't want to start right away with going to a really dirty restroom at a restaurant. You want to start with just other kinds of things that are less scary and that the kids feel more comfortable doing, because that'll let them build some confidence and have some success, so that once they step to the next part of the ladder, it's not as high as it was before. So these kinds of bravery missions or facing fears, they're most effective when they kind of are graduated. They start with a low level and they get higher. When you actually give enough time or kind of prolong the time that the kid's feeling anxious, because when you give your child time to feel anxiety, they're actually practicing feeling discomfort, which is great. That's what we want them to learn. We want them to feel uncomfortable and know that doesn't have to be an emergency. That doesn't have to be something I need to run away from. And that can be a really helpful practice for stress or for anxiety, but that can also be great for boredom, which I feel since COVID, kids have been reporting in very high levels, and inability to be bored. That's very difficult for them to be bored, and they need to do something every moment, and they need you as the parent to help them keep busy every moment. So even practicing those kinds of uncomfortable feelings of just sitting, not having something to do, can be really helpful for kids. And then repetitive, that's the most important thing in any kind of practice that you're doing it one time isn't going to give enough of an opportunity for your child or for yourself to really master the strategy. So you want to repeat it again and again so that you give your brain time to get used to it and to learn it. All right, these are some traps to watch out for. So the first one is trying to use logic with anxiety. This is very frustrating for parents often, because kids might feel very anxious about something, and logically it may not make the most sense. So maybe kids are really terrified that there's going to be an intruder who comes in the night. Well, it might be very tempting to say, oh, there's only a, 1 in 1,000 chance that that'll happen, or, statistically speaking, or, according to logic. And that kind of an approach is really helpful for kids to be able to learn to do themselves, for them to talk back to their thoughts. But when it's coming from a parent or a teacher, or sometimes even from a friend, a lot of times it might just shut kids down and make them more likely to argue back with you. And again, when it comes to something like an intruder, the reality is there are intruders. Like, somebody could intrude and it could happen tonight. And so focusing a lot on that logic and on the argument of what chance it will or won't happen, oftentimes will just keep the anxious cycle or the reassurance seeking cycle going. Simplifying, I think, is another error that we can make. We oftentimes think that if we say, oh, it's really easy, or you've done it before, that might be supportive or kind of encouraging our child to remember that, it's not so bad. In the moment, though, when kids are anxious, it does feel really bad. It doesn't feel easy. It feels really hard, and sometimes even impossible. And so you can kind of even imagine for yourself as a parent, if you're sitting there facing something that feels very difficult and are really struggling, but still working really hard, and somebody tells you, that's so easy, it makes us feel very defensive, and maybe makes it so that we're less likely to try. So being kind of mindful that whether or not it's easy by definition, it's not easy in the moment. But the other trap that we might fall into is kind of just demanding and trying to push our kids to do it. So might say, just do it, or it's taking too long, which can add a lot of stress for kids who are feeling anxious. Or maybe sometimes demanding, like, oh, you see, you just did it, you ordered your food at the restaurant, now you can do it every single time. So kind of making this big generalization that might make kids feel really intimidated and uncertain, and perhaps lead them to avoid more in response. And I think sometimes protecting is another trap that we might fall into. So for example, if your kid's saying, I'm really scared, I don't want to get my blood drawn at the doctor. I'm really scared of needles. Please don't make me. Saying, oh, you're scared. You're right. We don't have to do this. We'll figure out another way, or, we'll come back another time. And so that kind of pulls them out of that situation and doesn't give them that chance to practice actually facing the fear. So some of the things that you can do to help, validation or validating statements are your best friend. The idea of validation is that people just want to feel heard and understood, and they want to know that their emotions and what they're thinking, that it's valid. And so if you validate somebody, it doesn't mean that you agree or that you approve or that it even makes sense to you, but it just says, I see you right now and you are having a hard time, right? It makes sense that you feel really stressed. It's a really big worry thought you're having. Let's work together to explore it. Let's figure out how to talk back to that worry. You've been so brave. I'm proud of you for sitting with this feeling. And I know you can do it. You can sit with this anxiety. So providing these statements that say, I see you, I see that you're struggling, and then also adding in, and I believe in you. I believe that you can struggle. I believe that you can face the fear that's ahead of you. And then a lot of times, kids might come to you or they might open up conversations, and you as a parent are not sure what they're looking for. Do they want advice? Do they want a hug? Do they want constructive criticism? So for example, a child might come and say like, oh, here's my project for my science class. Maybe they're kind of, showing it to you. And as a parent, what does that mean? Do they want a good job? Are they saying they want your advice or your help on how they could do it differently? Are they looking for a hug? The easiest way to know is just to ask them and to slow down and remember that you don't have to know, you don't have to make an assumption about what they're looking for. So you could say, what support can I provide? Would it be helpful to talk more about this? The example of the project, might be saying, I love how hard you worked on this project. You did such an amazing job. Is there any way that I can help, or are you feeling ready to turn it in? All right, and these are some of the resources. So there's a few examples of apps that you can download that are really great for the breathing strategies or the muscle relaxation or the mindfulness. YouTube videos in general, I think are pretty helpful for all of these different tools and strategies. So being able to practice it in a way that somebody's talking you through how to do the breathing or how to be mindful or focused. And the more that kids practice and the more that you help your kids practice as a parent, you'll get more comfortable with doing some of these things on your own. And then I think these are some good reading resources as a parent. These books are really helpful for kids, I would say, across the developmental timeline, and gives you an idea of when anxiety takes hold, how does that change a little bit about, how your child is feeling inside and how they view the world and what some of their thoughts are, and how can you as a parent help guide them to create their own different ways of talking back to the anxiety. Because of course, as a parent who's not sitting with the anxiety, you kind of know like, oh, well, just don't have that thought, or like, oh, that's going to be fine. But a lot of times that doesn't actually help the child think differently about it. So there's good strategies, especially in this second resource, Freeing Your Child from Anxiety, that kind of guides you as a parent of how can I help my child to start using their critical thinking abilities to think about this a little bit differently. If your child does need more support, especially when we think about that list of, how much is the anxiety getting in the way? So if they're starting to avoid school or friends, if their sleep has changed, it might be a sign that they would benefit from additional support. So you could always have them work with a behavioral health provider who can provide an evaluation and then ongoing therapy. So learning some different skills. And then it's really helpful to not just learn the skills in therapy, but to use them every single day, even outside of therapy. And then sometimes kids may also benefit from medication. So meeting with your pediatrician or perhaps with a psychiatrist, and they can also complete an evaluation and provide appropriate medications like SSRIs if that is if that's needed.